Today, I want to talk about the most controversial player for Alabama football. This is both in terms of on and off the field, his past, and his future. He's had some moments where he's been in the news, he had an insanely crazy recruitment, and many scouts are completely split on where he's going to be in the NFL. Today, we're going to talk about his story, go through his college career so far, talk about everything surrounding him, and ultimately talk about where I think he'll be in the future. But before we get started, we're so close to 100K, so quickly be sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like if you want to support today's video, turn on notifications so you never miss when I upload, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I could cover next. Now, let's get started. So you're probably wondering who the subject of today's video is, and it is none other than current Alabama and former Georgia receiver Jermaine Burton. But let's first go back in time and tell his story. Growing up, Burton was actually both a golf and basketball prodigy before anyone knew what he could do with a football. But once he touched the football, it was game over. He started out at Hateville Charter Academy in Atlanta and then decided to go on to IMG Academy. That's when Burton showed up as some skinny kid from Georgia in a loaded position group with 4 wide receiver seniors. All those guys were part of the class of 2018 and were all bound for Power 5 schools. They were bigger and stronger, but it only took 3 weeks for Burton to nail down a starting position as a sophomore. That's pretty much unheard of. But Jermaine wanted to go back home, so he'd make a return to Georgia to play for Marietta High School, but unfortunately he was not granted eligibility by the Georgia High School Association, so he went across the country to Calabasas, California. As a junior there, he led his team with 863 yards and 14 touchdowns. He was also teammates with Micah Pittman, and Pittman played at both Oregon and Florida State, and Johnny Wilson, who played at Arizona State and Florida State now. Those guys were on the team, so it was a loaded receiver room to say the least. Because of how talented he was, he committed to Miami for 5 months during his sophomore year, but ended up backing off that decision. He'd reopened his recruitment, and he had over 20 offers to choose from, but where was he going to go? He eventually released a top 5 that included Miami, LSU, Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee, but then he would visit UCLA, and that would change everything. He said, quote, "It definitely made a difference in my recruitment. I'd say UCLA is now in my top 3. For a while, it seemed it was going to come down to Miami, LSU, and UCLA, but to be honest, Burton was all over the place, so you never knew what was going on. Right before his senior year, he decided he was going to transfer back to IMG, but then 2 weeks later, he said he was going to stay at Calabasas. I don't know how this keeps happening, and I wonder what the family's involvement was in this, because I wonder if they just decided to move around with him, or if he was just going off on his own. That's a question I could not get answered. Either way, Burton was all over the place. He eventually decided to commit to LSU and was excited to be a part of the Tigers program. But he would still leave the door open. He said, quote, "I know Georgia has not backed off, and I know Miami is still going on me. Some schools have backed off, I changed my number, and I don't know if that's why, but everything is all good. Everything still looks 100% for LSU, and I talk to the Tigers coaching staff almost every day. They're my guys." After going to multiple high schools and committing to numerous schools, Burton would have one last trick up his sleeve. He flipped to Georgia on early signing day, and this shocked the college football recruiting world. This happened because he was starting to wonder about Joe Brady's future at LSU. He knew Joe Burrow was going to be gone, and he said it felt like a roll of the dice to expect things to stay the same in Baton Rouge. LSU's next 2 years definitely were a struggle, so I guess he was right about that. Also, I guess the former Georgia product wanted to go home. He said, quote, "Definitely, that's what I thought of as soon as I started playing football, was going home. I never even saw myself leaving the state of Georgia, but when it came down to it, I did what was best for me, and I have to do that and choose the best school for me." Burton was also extremely close with his family and grandmother, as he said, quote, "They had a big part to do with it. My grandmother's getting older, and she can't be catching flights here and there all the time to come see me play." This was a huge get for Georgia, and Burton continued to stake his claim as one of the best receivers in high school, as he once again had a big senior campaign. Scouts noticed this too, and according to 24/7 Sports, he was a 4-star recruit, the number 15 receiver, and the 82nd best player in the class of 2020. So, how would he end up doing at Georgia? Burton arrived at Georgia, he knew he was going to have a chance at early playing time. In his first game, he'd catch a pass against Arkansas, and then he'd catch a pass in a victory over number 7 Auburn. This happened during the 2020 season, so everything was weird, and he had 2 catches against number 14 Tennessee, and then his first career touchdown to go along with 4 catches in a loss to Alabama. Burton was a decent role player throughout the first few weeks of the season, and that would continue till late November. He had a catch against both Kentucky and Florida before his big breakout game against Mississippi State. In that matchup, he'd catch 8 passes for 197 yards and 2 touchdowns as they narrowly defeated the Bulldogs 31-24. After that, he'd have 3 catches and 1 over South Carolina, and then 5 catches in a win over number 25 Mizzou. Because of that, Georgia would end up going to the Peach Bowl, where he caught 1 pass in a 24-21 victory over Cincinnati. As a freshman, Burton finished with 27 catches for 404 yards and 3 touchdowns. Expectations would go through the roof for Burton going into 2021, but honestly, it was a pretty underwhelming season. He caught 3 passes for 92 yards and a touchdown against UAB, had a touchdown against South Carolina, had a touchdown against Missouri, and had a touchdown against Georgia Tech, but other than that, he never had more than 4 receptions in the game, only went over 50 yards twice, and just didn't do a whole lot in the regular season, but a lot of that can be blamed on Georgia's offense. Georgia would end up getting to the SEC Championship, and then they would play against Michigan, where he caught his only pass for 57 yards and a touchdown in a 34-11 win over number 2 Michigan. After that, he go to the National Championship, where he had 2 catches for 28 yards. On the 2021 season, Burton finished with 26 catches for 497 yards and 5 touchdowns. He had just won a championship, and he was going to have high draft stock for this year, but then he'd make a change that shocked the college football world. He decided he was going to transfer to Alabama. He would get a ton of heat from this, as Georgia fans were not happy with him, and how could a guy who just won with Georgia think that going to Alabama would be better for him? This caused an absolute storm on social media, and he had a very simple response to this. He said, quote, "My career, nobody else's." It did make sense on paper. Georgia hadn't had a wide receiver drafted in the first round since 2011, and that was AJ Green, and honestly, that really wasn't changing anytime soon. George Pickens ended up going in the second round, but for the most part, the Bulldogs program is not where you go if you want to go in the first round or put up big time numbers. I guess Burton really thought about this, and with everything that went on in high school, I guess it wasn't too shocking either. He got a ring at Georgia, and with the recent success of Bama wide receivers, he was pegged as the next great receiver and the guy there, but how would that end up going? Well, the Tide had lost their top 3 receivers in Jamison Williams, John Mechie, and Slade Bolden. So far in the year, it's been a very mixed bag for Burton. Against Utah State, he caught 5 passes for 35 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he was off to a hot start. The next 4 games, though, were not very good. He had 2 catches in a close win over Texas, 1 catch against UL Monroe, and then 1 catch against Arkansas. They ended up beating Arkansas with a late second half surge, but through the first 5 games, he really wasn't that impressive, but besides Utah State and Vanderbilt. After that, he'd have a crucial touchdown against Texas A&M as they win that game 24-20, and then he had 2 catches for 49 yards against Tennessee, in which Alabama obviously lost. After that, he had 2 catches for 40 yards against Mississippi State, 2 catches for 19 yards against LSU, and I'm starting to notice a trend here. In the biggest games, Burton didn't really do anything. Over the last 2 games, he has started to change the narrative. He had 5 catches for 50 yards and a touchdown against number 11 Ole Miss, and he finally put his name out there. This past weekend, he had the best game of his Alabama career so far, as he caught 7 passes for 128 yards and 2 touchdowns in that one. So far in the year, Burton has 34 catches for 503 yards and 6 touchdowns. Those numbers don't really pop off the page. He doesn't really have an excuse for being in a bad system. And at this point, he'd be lucky to have over 700 yards receiving and 10 touchdowns. But scouts are definitely split. I've seen him as high as a 2nd round pick, and I've also seen him as low as the 7th round. Jermaine Burton's talent is obviously there, and some scouts are higher on him, but there's a very controversial event that happened this year that could end up hurting Burton in the long run. In that loss to Tennessee, a fan had her camera out, and as she was recording, Jermaine Burton apparently punched her. This situation became a firestorm on social media, with people wanting Burton suspended, and a lot of hate and criticism went his way. After the alleged punching video, Saban had this to say, quote, "I didn't think it was necessary to suspend the guy. If you knew the whole story, maybe you wouldn't either, but I'm not going to divulge that." Apparently I saw somewhere that he was defending himself or he felt threatened, and I'm not even going to really give my opinion on that, but it is what it is. A lot of the times the big time schools want to protect their players, and I guess that excuse was bought. But either way, that was uncalled for, and combining that situation with him being all over the place the last 7 years probably makes scouts question that. Combining that with the subpar stats makes Jermaine Burton one of the more interesting 2023 draft prospects. But no matter what, he'll probably end up getting drafted because of the Bama and Georgia name and his obvious talent. But what do you guys think? If you're a Bama or Georgia fan, what do you think of Jermaine Burton? What do you think of the situation? And where do you think he'll go in this year's draft? Be sure to let me know down below. Let me know what player or topic I can cover next. Leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and check out all of the videos on the end screen. Hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.